2020. It's the Week 13 preview of the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. It's crunch time.
All right. Welcome to the show. Hello out there in YouTube land, and anyone who's listening to it after the fact is a podcast. We appreciate your.
They can be watching after the fact too.
Sure, you can consume our show any way you like. We appreciate it anyhow. How are you doing tonight, Jason?
I am well, Dave.
They sound like a robot over there.
I'm thrown off.
I am fine, thank you.
This is the Fantasy Finish Line podcast from drinkfive.com. And I am Jason Evans, joined as always by David Biggs. Dave, cheers, buddy.
Oh, he has a routine he wants to do. I see.
Well, it's a thing that we do. We introduce ourselves to the people because there's new people all the time. If it was always the same people, they'd be boring.
Yeah.
We want new people. And so it's a Steelers day, Dave. How are you feeling about the Steelers today?
What's a Steelers day?
It's a day when the Steelers play.
Oh.
And a good Steelers day is a day when the Steelers win. I guess we can give them credit for a win today.
Yeah, sure. We did fine. I mean, obviously, all the stuff going on between the Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens, all the players that were missing, Marquise Pouncey in particular as the center for the Steelers, a guy who's been there forever, has really thrown off the team. Not to mention the fact that they were supposed to play a couple of different times and didn't do any of those dates.
Yeah.
Instead, moved to Wednesday afternoon so that we could all watch the tree lighting at Rockefeller Center.
Oh yes, that's going on right now. I hope that you're all done with your tree lighting and that everyone else has lit their own tree and that they're ready to get lit on a podcast.
Well, I appreciate the people that are tuned in now instead of watching the.
Why did
tree
we
lighting.
not get a little tree to light up?
Well, I mean, like light on fire. That's the kind of thing I'd like to do. Pyrotechnics in the studio.
In the studio. That sounds safe.
Anyway, shall we say that the Steelers and the Ravens both were a little unwieldy at best as far as fantasy production?
Steelers, and refresh my memory, I just spent an hour scrubbing my brain with an SOS pad to forget basically 2:40 to 6 o'clock from today.
Well, I did enjoy watching Juju have a pretty good game. You saw, again, how Deontay Johnson keeps getting a ton of targets. So those are some of the reinforced fantasy things that we saw.
Yes, this was the kind of game where a pretty good game was 39 yards.
Touchdown.
A touchdown and 8 receptions. So he racked up some counting stats. Good for Juju.
But yes, the statistics there, how the teams were performing was pretty poor. And I think we're ready to, like you said, scrub your brain, throw it in the garbage can, burn the tape. I don't think that either team was up to spec, or we should really even spend any more time discussing the performance.
Yeah, they were all clearly thrown off by the change in schedule, and hopefully that doesn't happen too much, but I assume it will.
Yep.
Before the end of the season. So tonight we are going to break down some waiver wires because of the game today. In most leagues that I'm aware of, all the waiver wires got pushed back 24 hours. So that means that tonight you're going to have to make waiver wire picks. I just realized I'm going to have to do that after the show. I'm not looking forward to having to spend time doing that for 6 leagues.
Yep, same here.
Yes,
so
great.
You know, but discussion fresh in your mind, it's got to be helpful.
Yeah, but, fresh anxiety for the rest of the show. So we'll go over waiver wire pickups. Dave's got some key players for us to look at. And then a little bit later on in the show, we're going to dip our toe into the Fantasy Fool's Gold and then talk about some deep starts that you should check out before we close out with the J-Cut list.
Okay. And tonight we're drinking a couple of different things. But I currently have a glass full of Lagunitas Sucks. And
it's not very nice.
Lagunitas is originally from California, but they a couple of years ago, several years ago now, put a brewery in Chicago, which I've been to. Super cool, very cool craft brewery, and now they're one of the biggest ones in the United States.
Biggest craft breweries, I'm sure. Yeah,
that's.
I
don't
think that they're anywhere close to the like a Miller.
No, although I think as the older generation heads off to the heavens, we might get less and less of a focus on Miller and more of a focus on the craft beers.
Dave, cheap beer is eternal.
You're so right. Are you drinking the same thing, or do you have something else?
Currently, I am also drinking a Lagunitas Sucks. We are going to crack open the New Belgium Lips of Faith series, the 2015 Le Terroir, a dry hop sour ale.
Don't look at me to pronounce it better because I no idea.
Come on, Frenchie.
I'm not. There's no French in me.
That's my French accent. I apologize to all of the French Canadians out there.
So as Jason said, we'll go ahead and start with the waiver wire, unless there's anything else you wanted to chat about.
No
first.
objections, please. Tell me who I should be picking up today.
So we have people that we've put in here, and I'll probably throw this up on the website. But of course, since it is already Wednesday night, we don't usually do waiver wire picks because our show is usually happening after those waivers go through in most leagues. This particular week, because of Wednesday Night Football and the chains becoming stretched out, we have those, and I've done a combination here of some guys that may be available in 10-team leagues and then some that could be in deeper leagues. We'll start with quarterbacks, and because of the nature of quarterbacks in regular 10 or 12-team fantasy football leagues, there's a lot of people that are taking someone like Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers and just starting them for the whole year, and that makes total sense.
Sure.
But those of us who may have players that are more on the verge of low QB1, high QB2 as our starter are more often switching them out for somebody else.
Yeah, you got to stream those guys.
And in 2 quarterback leagues, the Superflex leagues, there's a lot of these players that become much more valid. So let's talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick first. 34% owned in flea flicker leagues. And of course, when we talk about fantasy points, we're going to talk about half PPR because that's the standard here at Drink5. And Fitzmagic is back after a bit of a pause to try out the new guy. Tua Tagovailoa, he did an exemplary job in his first couple games, in my opinion. I saw those games. I liked what he was doing. He seemed like a game manager, sort of conservative, but also showed sharpness and vision. And I really enjoyed his play. He did pretty badly, though, in Week 11 and was pulled out. So when Fitzpatrick was starting in Week 12, he ended up putting up 257 yards and 2 touchdowns and is the guy that we know and love as Fitz. But I think that you're still going to see the Dolphins want to go with Tagovailoa as soon as they can. Now, right now, he is practicing, but it's very much in the air and uncertain whether he's going to get the start going forward or if Fitzpatrick will come in and play another game. I tend to think that we'll see Fitz until Tua gets 100% healthy, because what's the point of the Dolphins trying to injure their new quarterback?
So normally when you have a rookie quarterback, you're not in the playoff hunt. The Dolphins, I believe, are in the playoff hunt right now, so that could be a reason to try and get Tua in. But honestly, what I would do, where the Dolphins would be, keep Fitzpatrick in as the veteran so that you can maybe make the playoffs and get Tua back in Week 16, Week 17, when you know he'll be fully healthy for some playoff experience.
So we might see that, and that's why this is a speculative pickup for 2 quarterback leagues. You can also start Ryan Fitzpatrick if he plays again this next week, or maybe even going forward, as this year in general has been a really good one for Fitzpatrick. And the Dolphins have playmakers, although they've had issues at running back. Now it looks like they have all their guys healthy again as a committee. I don't see any problem with starting Fitz if you don't have one of the aforementioned guys. If you're starting in a position of weakness or have a high-end QB2 as your current starter and you're not happy with him, then going with the Fitzpatrick is not a bad choice. But you're going to have to wait until Thursday and Friday to see if Tua is going to be practicing with the ones and looking to actually start the game.
Right, you want Friday practice especially. And yeah, if he's healthy, they should put him out there to play. I mean, the Dolphins play Cincinnati. Great spot for your rookie to get in the groove.
Yeah, the Brandon Allen led Cincinnati.
Brandon Allen. I couldn't have taken 5 guesses and gotten to Brandon Allen.
Who used to be a little bit more daunting when at least they had Joe Burrow, the rookie. But Brandon Allen's not anyone.
They were downright impressive with Joe Burrow. Or at least Joe Burrow was downright impressive.
They were higher than the Andy Dalton line with Joe Burrow.
That's true.
And now Andy Dalton's not even above the Andy Dalton line, perhaps. Number 2, Mitchell Trubisky. Mitchell, as he wanted to be called, and he told Chicago Bears fans to please call him Mitchell. 24% owned Trubisky is another quarterback who's back after a little bit of a timeout. They put in Nick Foles for a while. He rolled his set of Bears-themed dice and came up with 242 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And Trubisky, as we know,
over several games, right?
no, last game,
That was one. Oh, Mitch did.
Mitch, not
Yeah.
Foles. So rumors are swirling that that he is going to be the quarterback down the stretch and continuing for the Bears, and it makes sense because Foles had a prove yourself moment, couple of games, didn't do it. Right? It doesn't seem to me that Trubisky or Foles is the answer for Chicago Bears fans. Perhaps there is no answer for Chicago Bears fans. However,
Trevor Lawrence.
However, Trubisky seems to be able to target Allen Robinson in the end zone, and we know that he's had years where he scores a lot of fantasy points, somewhat inexplicably so. Even if the Bears are being a bad football team and he is not a good quarterback in reality, Trubisky can still be a good fantasy quarterback. Logic be damned. And he did score,
Now
20.
you're talking Chicago Bears football.
Right, he scored 20 plus points last week and can continue to do so as long as he's not shut out by a very high end defense. I think
Well, a lot of that was garbage points, wasn't it? Because the Packers were up like 41-10.
perhaps I mean
Fourth quarter.
he orchestrated some good passes to Robinson, et cetera, that weren't uncontested. But I know what you're saying. But I mean, coming from someone who won a dynasty league with Blake Bortles as his QB2, it doesn't really matter in fantasy if the quarterback is good or not. It only matters if they score fantasy points.
It's true.
So Trubisky can continue to score 20 plus points and might just do so over the next couple of weeks, which is why he's certainly a quarterback 2 for a superflex league, or again someone that you might want to turn to if you have someone that you don't like on your squad currently. And I know that people are going to be hesitant to select someone like Trubisky for their QB1, but I have to tell you that we're going to be just as hesitant to select a guy like Derek Carr, who scored 2 points last week.
Oh, I think in some leagues he was negative.
Oh,
He had 5 turnovers.
That's insane.
That's brutal.
I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat room about Trubisky and Fitzpatrick, and if any of you would consider playing him if you don't already have a stud in the lineup. Let's talk about running backs. So I'll be a little quicker and just ask you for your input at the end. Cam Akers of the Rams, 61% owned, so owned in most leagues. The committee in Los Angeles is now back together with Darrell Henderson and Brown and Akers. So the three of them, as they were in the beginning of the year, it's sort of difficult to choose between. One might have a good game and the other one does afterwards. But Cam did very well last week coming back with limited touches, and he rushed for 84 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries. He looks like the best of the bunch to me, and it does take a while for rookies to really break out and understand the offense. I think he might be at that point. He's trending up over the past 3 games, 3.8, 8.4, and 14.4 fantasy points over the last 3 games, and touchdowns in the last 2 matchups. So I care a lot about trends and usage. I see Akers' usage going up. I see his points going up. I see 2 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I see a startable asset in fantasy.
So one thing I like about that is that he is being productive while not being in very much. So 26% offensive snaps, 17%, 27% over the last 3 games, which means there is a lot of room for growth. If he is being productive, they need to put him in more,
Right.
which means that he could be in for 30, 40% of the snaps, and just that what you're looking at right now could be his floor.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? He could be a running back to target, especially, he's probably owned in all dynasty keeper leagues currently.
Certainly.
But going down the stretch, he could be a guy who's scoring you 15 points a game, and that's exactly what you want to pick up on the waiver wire. Number 2, Frank Gore. So 39% owned Frank Gore. It's amazing to me that Gore can appear on a list like this one, first of all, and no one else on the Jets roster is trusted enough to carry the load.
Let's roll the tape of us making fun of Frank Gore 5 years ago, 8 years ago, being like, haha, we'll still talk about him in 2020. Ha ha ha.
I think as we first started this podcast so many years ago, sitting on a couch with one mic between us, we were even then talking about the demise of Frank Gore as something that would absolutely happen shortly.
The eternal demise of Frank Gore.
But it never
It
happened.
never happens.
It never happened. Frank Gore is around. He's going to be around for a little while longer. And while he's the number 1 running back there, he's just doing pretty well. So he has to be considered a starter on your team moving forward, at least in a flex position. 39% owned means that he's available in most leagues. And He got 15 carries for 61 yards and a touchdown with 2 receptions in Week 11, 18 carries for 74 yards and 3 receptions in Week 12. I think that's a consistent play. They're showing there that the Jets are not a great team, but they're still going to run the ball with one guy right now, and that guy is Frank Gore. They go up against the Las Vegas defense that allowed the Falcons with Ito Smith and Brian Hill to run all over them. So I don't see a reason why
That
Frank.
was disgraceful by the Raiders.
It was a horrible Raiders game.
And now this game's going to be in the Meadowlands, so the Raiders probably wound up staying out east the whole week. Maybe that'll help them, maybe not. They need some way to get well on the Jets, but I mean, this could be the Jets' one win.
So here is a guy, Frank Gore, that is probably likely to at least run 15 times and say a 50% odds at a touchdown. I think that it's a good play in a position where there's a lot of committee running backs, there's a lot of injuries to running backs. Would you play Frank Gore if you had him available and didn't have a strong RB2?
Look, there are so many injuries and players out with COVID right now that Frank Gore is probably going to be started in more leagues than he won't be.
Yeah, and I don't see a problem with that. I mean, but I want to say like this could be the last stronghold of Frank Gore, but I know if I say that he's going to play for 5 more years.
We should just keep saying that for his sake.
It's the last chance
Let's
you
just
have.
do nothing but doubt Frank Gore because then he will become immortal.
He's certainly got superhero tendencies, Frank. Devontae Booker, 25% owned. I have the Jets here, but he's on the Raiders. He has a chance in quotes to play this week, but he'll likely Jacobs, but he'll likely be on a snap count regardless. An ankle injury that he suffered was not that great looking, and Booker will have some touches regardless against the Jets, who are allowing some big games from running backs. The interesting thing about this to me is that the Jets allow a lot of receptions to running backs, and these stats can get a little muddy. But Booker is not a guy who's been having a lot of receiving success or opportunities in the football game when he's in there. So we'll see if that translates to anything. But what we do know is the snaps that do not go to Jacobs, or if Jacobs doesn't play, a lot of that will go right to Booker, and Booker is a guy that's 25% owned, so you can get him in most leagues right now. Jason's also going to be featuring this player a little bit later in the podcast, and so we'll go more into detail. Yeah, spoilers. Do you want it to add anything now, or do you want to just go into it in a bit?
We'll talk about it in a little bit.
Okay, one more running back, Royce Freeman from Denver, 24% owned, so the least of the bunch. Philip Lindsay over there is not currently practicing, doesn't look likely to suit up for Week 13's matchup against the Chiefs. President Gordon needs a vice president, and that's Freeman, this particular matchup. And it's not a sure thing, but it's sure thing. We've got Freeman in a position where we know that he can run the ball well. We know he can receive the ball in the backfield. Freeman has put up a lot of points before, especially in his rookie year and second year with the Broncos. And with no Lindsay out there, it seems like a position that is not strong. But when we're looking for flex plays or RB2s because our team is decimated with injuries, Freeman is someone that you could pick up, put in, and he will certainly get some fantasy points. Depending on how deep your league is, maybe all you need in that position is some fantasy points. Thoughts about Freeman or the Denver running back situation currently?
I just hope that they have a quarterback this week. Well, that's going to do a lot for their running back.
They're all set to play this week.
If they have no quarterbacks again, don't play anybody from that team.
That's true. If
any team has no quarterbacks, don't play anyone from that team.
That's correct. Wide receivers, T.Y. Hilton, 63% owned. So we advise you, like many people advise you, not to play Hilton and even to drop him earlier this season. And I think that was completely warranted. But it appears like Hilton's finally catching some chemistry with Rivers, and that's demonstrated in 4 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown in Week 12 against the Titans. Now those numbers are what they are, but I saw the game and it looked like he was looking for Hilton pretty often, and that's what you want to see in a wide receiver. I do want to mention that 50 yards of that came from one long pass, So this pickup may shine like gold, but it's just as likely that Pittman goes back to being the number one wide receiver next week against Houston. However, Rivers can historically support multiple receivers, whether it's a tight end and two receivers or three wide receivers in a given week. So I think that anything is possible here for the Colts, and it's not unusual to me that that T.Y. Hilton could come back on strong, especially at the end of the year, a proven commodity like Hilton.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what was wrong with him earlier in the year, but it is promising to see what happened last week, and I'm looking forward to that team gelling a little bit more with its wide receiver core because it just hasn't so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I noticed looking at the box score from the Titans-Colts game is that because they were behind a lot, there was a lot of dump-offs to the running back. Nyheim Hines led the team with 10 targets, but then you did have Pittman right behind him with 9 targets.
Yeah, he's still being
It's
targeted.
just 2 catches means that they're probably going to lose the game. You know.
Yes, indeed. Looks like we have some questions coming in. I'm going to try to finish this section real quickly.
Okay, I'll parse these questions and prepare an answer.
Debo Samuel with San Francisco is 72% owned, so he's owned in most leagues. If he is available, he's a great pickup regardless of who's playing at quarterback, which looks to still be Nick Mullins, because Samuel will be enjoying 5+ targets per game no matter what happens, and more than likely more than that, 7, 8 per game. And Samuel is going back to his role as the number one wide receiver there. But he's not owned in a lot of leagues, so what I'm saying is if he's available, pick him up immediately. Spend a whole bunch of the FAAB that you might have in that league because he is the number one guy that's available if he's available, in my opinion. Kiki QT for Houston is 9% owned, so this is more interesting. He hasn't been on the radar so far this year. That's because they had a lot of receivers there. They had Stills playing, and of course they had Fuller and Cooks, and so QT was relegated to a practice field role and not really starting on a day-by-day basis for the team. But after separating with Stills and having Fuller get suspended for the remainder of the fantasy season with PED usage, QT suddenly finds himself as the WR2 on a team that can put up a lot of points very quickly with Deshaun Watson under center. Back in 2018, when he was a rookie and being used more often, he had 4 double-digit games, including one with 11 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. He also had a couple of double-digit games in 2019. So I honestly think that QT will excel immediately, especially in PPR leagues. I have experience with him on my teams, especially in Dynasty, and I dropped him because I thought that he, had fallen off a cliff and they just weren't interested in raising him up to that level. But sometimes the possibilities and opportunities change based on what's going on with the active roster. This is one of those times. It's Cooks and QT, and I see no reason why he's not a playable asset every single week going forward.
Yeah, I mean, somebody has to fill the slot there. There's nobody at wide receiver on that team. And we thought that before after Hopkins left, and Fuller did fill that role, so it's going to have to be QT now.
There is another rookie wide receiver named Isaiah Coulter, who's going to come in as like the WR3. But talk about unproven commodities. I have no idea what to expect out of him, and I do know that at the very least, QT is going to have that Kenny Stills role, his modern role, which is more of a possession slot receiver, and they'll probably use Coulter as a down-the-field guy. But Kiki QT can also run pretty quickly and get down there, so we'll see what happens. Last guy, Colin Johnson for Jacksonville, and some of you may not have heard of him before, but 8% owned. With DJ Chark and Chris Conley both injured, Colin Johnson last week got 4 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets. 8 targets is a great number that lets us know that he's being utilized heavily in the offense and that they trust him to catch the ball. Cole, Chenault, and Johnson appear to be the healthy wide receivers right now on the Jacksonville team. So is it possible that Glennon and Johnson were buddies on the practice squad? We talk about this a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And when you have a guy coming in as the second or third string quarterback, like we see with Glennon, it's very often that the chemistry they have is not with the all-star wide receivers on that team.
Right.
It's with the guy that they played catch with every single day.
Let's be honest, they're not really all-star receivers. If they were all-star receivers, we'd be we'd be using them still.
Well, DJ Chark's pretty good, but the other guys are kind of toss-ups at any time.
Correct.
So, do you think that's possible that Johnson and Glennon are buddies?
Yeah, I feel like we haven't really seen a backup to backup connection this year on any team. So I look forward to finally finding one.
Yeah, hear that. So, how about a question from the audience?
So MathQuest mentions that Kyler Murray had a bad shoulder injury that he played through, and I believe this happened 2 weeks ago. Last week, it clearly hampered his production in the game against the Patriots, so he wants to know, should he pivot to Justin Herbert this week? First of all, kudos for carrying a strong quarterback on your bench. We would often advise against that, but it looks like you need it right now, and I would agree that it's probably the right time to switch to Justin Herbert. Now, he isn't really blowing the doors off the place anymore, but he played Buffalo last week. In Buffalo, that was tough. Now they get New England at home. New England did play well against Kyler last week, but like we said, Kyler was likely hurt. New England did the week before give up 31 points to Deshaun Watson, 22 to Lamar Jackson, and 21 points to Joe Flacco back in week 9.
Yeah, but Flacco was a stud, let's be honest.
Right.
He was just trucking it down.
That's who Baltimore needed today. So, anyways, I think that Justin Herbert will be fine. He will probably put up more points than Kyler Murray. And it's a bit of a spoiler, but I will tell you that Kyler, not a spoiler, screw it. We're here to give you information. Kyler has a terrible matchup this week. The Rams are the second best team against opposing quarterbacks. So I endorse this move.
I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, again, as it relates to DeAndre Hopkins.
Correct.
Right? And I personally, I agree with Jason, and I think that Kyler, although they're downplaying it, both the coach and Kyler, etc., he was obviously hurt. There's been an obvious impact to his performance, and it's not to say that he can't correct that path, but I don't think it's going to be this week in a bad matchup. So I'm not saying don't play Kyler or the guys on that squad going forward, but I think maybe resting him this week for someone who you think will have a little bit more consistent performance and isn't hurt is a good idea.
Sure.
And if you look at my rankings on the website, drinkfive.com, for this particular week, I have Kyler Murray as the number 8 quarterback right now. That could change, we'll see, but I have Herbert as the number 6 quarterback. And so for your question, the answer is Herbert.
Oh, wow. Very nice. I didn't even consult your rankings. I do have them up, and I often consult them during the podcast. But
well, I think we all agree here, and so MathQuest, I would suggest that you sit Kyler Murray, even though that's really hard to do because he can easily put up 30 points in a game. I don't think it'll be this week, and I think it's so great, like Jason mentioned, to happen to have a guy like Herbert who can give you that 22 points when you need it.
Good on you for having him.
Yeah.
I mean, if you didn't have someone ranked above Murray, it'd be a much tougher question. With someone ranked above Murray, I think it's pretty easy.
Yep. Okay, so let's finish up what we have currently. We're looking at tight ends, which is Jason's favorite category of fantasy player.
No, kicker. Kicker is my favorite category.
Well, so let's look at Kyle Rudolph, Minnesota, 32% owned. Rudolph had 7 for 68 on 8 targets in Week 12. And keep your eye on the status of Adam Thielen and of Smith, the other tight end. Their absence helps bring more targets.
Irv Smith.
Irv Smith Jr. Their absence helps bring more targets into Rudolph. And remember, Rudolph was a top 10 tight end once who was going as a top 10 tight end for a couple of years, and he certainly could be again. I like Kyle Rudolph. The problem over there is that they just kept getting more and more tight ends. Now there's 3 of them over there that occasionally get the ball.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a situation in Baltimore if there was a good tight end on the roster not named Mark Andrews. So I think that down the fantasy playoff stretch, getting Kyle Rudolph on your squad is not a bad idea, especially if you have someone right now like a Noah Fant or someone that you're unsure of. I think Kyle Rudolph has trended in a good, positive direction. And obviously that the 7 for 68 it brings him head and shoulders above a lot of tight ends, especially this past week. Trey Burton is the second guy, Indianapolis, 30% owned. And Burton on the Bears was also good in various situations and early in on the season before he kind of faded off and flew over the cuckoo's nest.
There was a handful of situations.
Yeah. So I think he's the touchdown guy, the red zone tight end guy for the Colts. Again, on another squad that has like 2 or 3 tight ends they can pass to, they tend to go to Burton for those clutch situations.
Yeah.
But think about it this way, though. Burton will get the jitters when it really counts. When you are sitting there in your fantasy championship game and Burton is called upon to get that touchdown, he won't even go out to the field. So I think he's imminently startable at the moment, but let him go before his anxiety gets the best of him.
Interesting. So they are playing Houston. Houston is they're not bad against the tight end. 12th fewest fantasy points, but they did just give up 11.4 to TJ Hawkinson.
Well, both of those guys have been doing well. I think Burton has touchdowns for the last couple of games, so it's always good to play trends and
He does. Burton has had a good streak lately. He's the one guy, and I have on a couple teams, and I have not good tight ends on those teams, and I just keep not starting Trey Burton.
Yeah, well, I don't know why.
It's a terrible decision, I'm telling you.
Who are you starting instead of Trey Burton?
I'm not going to admit that because people are going to turn off the podcast if I admit it. And deservedly so. Let's move on, Dave.
All right. Well, one of the things that I did want to talk about is the defenses going forward. But rather than talk about that on the podcast here, I think I'll just write an article about it. So just keep your eyes out and peeled at drinkfive.com. And what I'm going to do is write an article that sort of features what defenses are going to be good in week 14 and 15 that you could pick up now or next week for later down the playoff stretch. And, we don't say during the regular season that you should pick up multiple defenses or multiple quarterbacks for a good reason. And that's because you need to have those depth guys on your team for when one of your guys goes out and is injured.
Right. Well, you manage your team differently than you do, in the playoffs than you do during the regular season.
Yeah.
It happens a little bit in football, but where it's really clear is if you're a baseball fan, you notice that like a manager will completely use his starting rotation and all of his pitchers differently in the playoffs than in the regular season.
Right.
And that's sort of how you got to think of it here, where your bench is no longer just for depth. Your bench is for strategic matchups down the line.
Yeah, so once you get to the point where you are going to make the playoffs, or in the best case scenario, when you actually have a bye week, you can just pile up guys that will be good later and not worry about the injuries that can happen now. Because for your team to win, you have to have a couple weeks of good luck, and screw having the handcuffs of everybody. Get rid of them. Just put up those guys that no one else can have, and you can start them because their matchups are that much better than the other guys.
Yeah, you need to have the most important players on your team, not just the handcuffs, not just what you think of as like the bench players you've let ride.
Yep. So why don't we open up that new beer if you think that's a good idea for this new segment that Jason's going to carry?
Well, let the adventure begin, as the bottle opener says.
La terroir.
La terroir. Le.
I don't. Again,
Le terroir.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on this pronunciation.
Well, we had what was the raison d'etre?
Raison d'etre.
And I it's one of those things that I'd never heard of that saying before, and then after that, I hear it pop up every once in a while. It's satisfying.
Where does it pop up? Like in Talking Head songs, or like where do you hear it?
The last time I heard of I heard the term, and I've heard it in several places, was on the West Wing Weekly podcast. It's just raison d'etre is just the reason for being, the reason for living. So it's like people like dropping Latin phrases, carpe diem, in speech to sound smart. People like to drop French phrases in their speech to be smart.
All right.
That's all. It's just people trying to look smarter than they are. And I don't think that the person who said that would be upset with me calling him out for that. Anyways, this is a dry hopped sour ale from 2015, apparently. I don't remember. I remember seeing this beer years ago. I don't know if like this bottle is 5 years old. I just bought it at the liquor store today, so it smells pretty good. Here, Dave.
Did you want me to smell it, or am I good?
Mystery glass.
What?
That's all yours. So we will jump on into the Fool's Gold portion of the evening tonight. So Fool's Gold is a recurring segment, we could call it. These are often players that are good, that you're often starting every week or most weeks, and I want to caution you against them. If you start these two players, I will not look down on you. I will not blame you because these are big names. However, I think that in week 13 of the fantasy season, you need to be bold with your lineup choices if you have to win to make the playoffs. So, my first player is Alvin Kamara. This week, the Saints are traveling to Atlanta. They're going to play the Falcons. They just played the Falcons in week 11. In that game, which was the first game that Taysom Hill started, Kamara had 13 carries for 45 yards, 0 receptions. That 0 receptions was the first time in his career that he did that. He found the end zone that game, but it's clear that his workload and effectiveness have gone way down without Drew Brees in the game. These last two games are the worst of the season for Kamara. They're the worst receiving games of his career. Over that time, he only has 1 reception for -2 yards, less than 100 yards from scrimmage in both games combined. And since Raheem Morris has taken over as head coach, the Falcons have really stepped up their rush defense. Over the last, I think it's 5 games that Morris has been in charge, they have only allowed, the highest scoring running back, has only had 12.8 points. So this is week 13 of the fantasy season. It's the final game of the regular season. You need points. The ceiling for Alvin Kamara is far lower than it has been all season. And in my opinion, you need to dip into your bench. You need to find someone with a better matchup, with a better chance for a high point total, with a better ceiling, because you don't want to screw around with anyone on your team anyone on your fantasy team that's playing for the Saints right now. Taysom Hill as a QB2 is, in my opinion, the only acceptable play in this situation from that team. Everyone else right now is not worthwhile. And I didn't even think about mentioning Michael Thomas because he's been such a disappointment all year, but he's probably the kind of player that fits perfectly in this fool's gold scenario where you just need to avoid them. But honestly, the Falcons are way more susceptible to the passing game. It's the running game that they're really buckling down on. So I think that you need to bench Alvin Kamara if it's feasible on your team. If you have a strong bench, if you have anybody with some good upside on your bench, then you need to leave Kamara on the bench and put someone else in.
He's gonna die on this ship, right?
Who, me or Kamara?
You.
I don't have Kamara in any leagues, so I can't put my money where my mouth is.
Well,
but my next player, I'm strongly considering it.
Looking at trending down is interesting when we talk about the points from week 10, 11, 12, 31, 10, and 5. Obviously, Taysom Hill is interfering with that because Taysom Hill runs, not Kamara. And
Right.
Taysom Hill is not a guy who's going to be passing in the backfield because he's looking for those option plays, and that's who he is. The most interesting thing about this whole situation is that they played Atlanta the first week that Taysom was the starting quarterback, and they play Atlanta again. And Atlanta seems like they have stepped up a notch, or turned a switch or two or something in destroying the last team that they played. And I don't know if, and this is a hard thing about doing analyzation, if Las Vegas was just that bad, if Atlanta was that good, if it was a situational kind of a thing.
It's a combination of several things, in my opinion.
But this could be a game where Atlanta beats the Saints, and Taysom Hill is looking pretty poor. In any case, I agree with Jason's estimation that Alvin Kamara is probably not a start for this particular week. Now, he might score 10 or 11 points, so you're assuming that you have someone on your bench that's going to probably score more than that. So I would put a number at it and say, like, if you have a guy that's going to score more than 10 points, put him in there instead of Kamara.
I think that 12 points is Kamara's ceiling right now. And, he's going to have a high floor. He's going to have 6 or 7, but he's not going to really score more than 12. And, you have someone on your bench who has a higher ceiling than that. Almost definitely.
Or even one of the guys we talked about earlier might have a higher ceiling.
Yeah, there's people you could pick up that have a higher ceiling.
So here's the good question then. Do you start Alvin Kamara or Frank Gore, and will you die on that ship?
Oh, my God. If I say yes, will you let me back on the podcast next week?
No, I think you're right. Now, this is all percentage chances. Kamara could have 2 touchdowns because they were the right situation for him to have them. But like we talked about previously about James White, who had a situation that we thought he'd go right back into a receiving back. Instead, he scored 2 small short yardage touchdowns, which were the result of opportunistic schemes.
Yeah, I think we forgot when we were talking about James White that Cam Newton can't throw short passes. He can't throw a touch or any sort of finesse. So that's why James White isn't getting the passes.
He used to throw the ball to Christian McCaffrey, so he can certainly throw those passes.
He can't right now. He can only just he's like Jameis Winston. He just throws it as hard as he can down the middle.
Yeah. So Frank Gore or Alvin Kamara?
Frank Gore, man. I mean, I gotta go with.
I'm not gonna bet you. I'm just interested because I feel like you're not that wrong. Gore could have 9 points and Kamara scores 7. Let's see and I won't be surprised.
In your rankings, how far apart Frank Gore and Alvin Kamara are. So you have Alvin Kamara at 13. Respect for sure.
Well, he was normally like 1 or 2. I had to bring him down.
Exactly. Well, his ECR is 11 this week, and you're still below that. And then Frank Gore is number 28, up 2 spots from his ECR. So you're slowly inching them together. I don't think that they'll cross by Sunday, but yeah, Frank Gore over Alvin Kamara.
Okay, well, you heard it here first.
And probably only. You're the only one who's going to say that.
What's the next spot on your list?
So DeAndre Hopkins. So like I said, they're big swings here in Fool's Gold this week. Because it's the last week of the regular season, you have to do something huge. You can't just start a big name that is struggling just because of their name. Just like Kamara, DeAndre Hopkins has been struggling. So, in my opinion, you need to find a way to keep him on your bench. In 3 of his last 4 games, he has point totals of 4.5, 7.6, and 8.0. This is when Kyler Murray is struggling. We both seem to agree Kyler Murray is definitely struggling. He's lost his mojo. He needs Austin Powers to help him get it back. So the Cardinals struggled against the Patriots last week. This week, their opponent is the Rams. They're even better against the passing game than the Patriots are. The Rams are giving up the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, the second fewest points to opposing quarterbacks as well, just to reiterate that whole Kyler Murray point. So it's a terrible matchup for Hopkins. It's a time when his team is struggling. He's only led the team in targets 2 of the last 4 weeks. He is a guy that should be leading his team in targets every single week. So he can't just be thrown in and assumed to be his dominant self. You need to think long and hard about who you are putting in at your lineup. On DeAndre Hopkins, no matter what you think, even if you start him, he is not your WR1 this week. He is your WR3 at best. And if you have a weak bench, you're probably going to leave him in. But if you have a strong bench, you need to seriously consider the other players who are trending up, the guys who have better matchups, the guys who have a more favorable quarterback situation, and start them in place of DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I'm in on that. I mean, if your bench can lift more than your starters, then get them in there. They're the strong bench is what you're looking for.
So you're going to ask me like Kiki Cutie or DeAndre Hopkins?
Do you want me to?
No. I just wanted you to not ask Colin Johnson or DeAndre Hopkins.
Look, I think we agree that those 2 guys are rough starts. There is one thing about them is that if this was 8 years ago, we would still say to start your studs no matter what. Now, I don't know if I would be so courageous as you as to call out both of those players this particular week. But I think that regardless of what happens, at least one of those guys is going to have a bad game. And it makes sense because you've stacked up all the reasons for that to happen.
Look, I ultimately might be wrong, but hopefully this wasn't boring.
Well, if you are needing a win no matter what this particular week, it's rough to not start DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think people are going to do it. But I can see how Alvin Kamara would be that kind of guy.
So can we do a little real-life situation? So, like I said, I don't have Alvin Kamara, so I can't put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah,
however,
you're playing me in a league, and you have DeAndre Hopkins on that squad. Are you not? Are you not
Let's look
going
at the
to start
team
him?
where I'm not playing you, and I have DeAndre Hopkins first. Okay, so I have Hopkins, McLaurin, Chris Godwin. I have on my bench T. Higgins, Jarvis Landry, and Jalen Reagor. So next week's matchups, Jarvis Landry is playing Tennessee. I'm losing Chris Godwin, so I have to find a way to start either Rager or Higgins over Hopkins.
You can't start the Eagle receiver, right?
I can't start Rager. And
Rhaegar sounds like a He-Man character.
see, I don't know that I can start T. Higgins. I may need to pick up someone to start them over Hopkins. Oh boy, this is something I'm going to be turning over in my head for quite a while.
But what you're saying perhaps is that
also Week 13 buys are bullshit. NFL, let's not do that again next year.
Is that his ceiling is definitely collapsing, and that you're not going to start Hopkins as a WR1 or maybe not even a WR2, which you mentioned earlier. So that if you have a guy on your bench that you think can have that consistent amount of points this particular week, you may start him over him. So if you had let's say a guy like Jamison Crowder or someone, would you start him over Hopkins?
Crowder was like borderline on my list of fool's gold.
Well, Crowder's great. The Jets are a problem.
Yeah, it's the Jets that are a problem.
So I currently have Hopkins at number 12.
I gotta say, I don't know that I have deep enough benches on either team to start Hopkins, and it's because I have Godwin on both of those teams, and he's on bye. So the number one bench guy already is playing. So I need my number 2 bench guy to be better than Hopkins. That's tough. What I'm saying here is, for these guys, like, your top bench guy is probably going to be better than them. The second best bench guy, that's a toss-up.
You have to practice what you preach, though. Like, start Pittman over Hopkins. It wouldn't be surprising to see Pittman score 13 points. If you're saying that Hopkins is only going to have 5 grabs for 60 yards, then why would you start Hopkins?
We're both going to be at the same record. We're both going to need to win and we're in the playoffs. Losing, it's going to be close.
You're talking about a matchup for us. I have more points than anybody else currently.
But if I beat you, then I don't have to worry about that tiebreaker.
Well, if I have more points than anyone else, then I don't have to worry about their records.
You're right. So then we'll both make it. So just lose to me, and we'll see each other in the
Just
playoffs.
Don't start Hopkins, and we'll see what happens. But I'll be interested to see if he actually does start Hopkins or not, and it's an interesting discussion. These are the guys that are your studs, and so, like I said before, when we first started off on the podcast, one of the things that people always said was always start your studs. Even when you're starting to think that they're not going to do well, always start them. Now, if you're saying that's not the right advice, there are some weeks that you should not start them, like you are with Kamara and Hopkins.
So
you have to put a number to that, is what I'm saying.
There are situations like Alvin Kamara not having Drew Brees as his quarterback anymore, or DeAndre Hopkins not having the Kyler Murray as his quarterback and only having, a little bit of Kyler Murray as his quarterback. Those are like the outside factors that are going into this that are causing me to want to sit these guys.
Of course, but you know that it doesn't matter. Hopkins could still score 2 touchdowns and get 100 yards, even if it's a little bit of Kyler Murray.
Of course, and I think that Hopkins has a better chance, a slightly higher ceiling than Kamara. But also, your wide receiver depth should be bigger on most teams. Like I said, if I didn't have one of my starting wide receivers on bye, this would be a pretty easy decision for me. I would probably be sitting him.
Well, let's revisit this next week.
I did not look at my lineups before making this call.
And we'll see what you ended up starting and whether or not it was the right decision. And if it wasn't, then who would you have had on your bench that would have been a better call? So,
right.
We can talk about hindsight.
Probably Saul.
But do you think that you're going to end up starting him just as, in your mind, the wide receiver 3? Because it doesn't matter for a fantasy football team where you start a person, as long as they're starting or
it's
not
true.
starting.
That's very true. I mean,
you're not going to get as many targets today, Hopkins.
Look,
you're the WR3.
If Burrow was still playing, I would definitely start T. Higgins over him. But that's not the case anymore. If I can nab one of these wide receivers on the waiver wire, like I've got Jakeem Grant, I'm not thrilled with that. But if I can land Deebo Samuel, if I can land T.Y. Hilton, then it's going to be a serious consideration.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next segment you got planned for us today.
Yep, so these are some sort of deep starts. So guys who are further down the rankings list, who I think need to have a good shot at making your lineup this week. We've got Devontae Booker, who we talked about earlier, so we'll kind of skirt over this. But last week, like we said, the Raiders game was a burn-the-tape kind of game. They were completely dominated by the Falcons. They surrendered in the fourth quarter. They pulled all their starters. So Devontae Booker got in the game because Josh Jacobs had an injury, an ankle injury. So that's what you need to track here. If Jacobs does not play this week, Booker will be the main guy at running back, and it's a prime bounce back situation for the Raiders against the Jets. Normally, I would think that the Raiders would continue being bad all year because last year they had a catastrophic loss to the Jets and then sucked the rest of the year. This year, they had a catastrophic loss against the Falcons, but they have a chance to get better against the Jets. So let's see if this team can learn and grow.
So what they have in common is cats.
I'm going to go with that. So the Jets are giving up the 9th most points to opposing running backs. In recent games, they've given up double-digit points to such illustrious names as Kalen Ballage and Rex Burkhead. So Booker has had a couple of excellent games lately when he's given enough carries. Week 9, he averaged 8.5 yards per carry, scored a touchdown, put up 12.8 points. The following week, he had 16 carries, 81 yards, 2 more touchdowns. So when he's given a chance, he can put up very respectable numbers on an offense that should do well against bad teams. We just need to pay attention to the injury report, see if Jacobs is going to play or not. As we always mention about injury reports, always pay attention to them. Thursday is important to see if they practice. Friday is probably the most important day to see if they practice. But remember, there's all kinds of games that aren't on Sunday anymore because of everything, and so push those days back accordingly. That's all. And then another guy I like is Jared Goff. He's been having an up and down season. He does seem to do very well when the opposing team can't get a lot of pressure on him, and the opposite is true. He does pretty poorly when he's given no time in the pocket. So this week he faces a team that's giving up the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks, that being the Arizona Cardinals. It includes 20-plus point performances in 4 of the last 5 weeks. Last week against Cam Newton being the only exception to that trend. So Jared Goff is much better than Cam Newton. Let's remember that. I like Goff as a streaming option. I like Goff as a 2-quarterback option. I like Goff as an emergency backup. So say MathQuest did not have Justin Herbert available. I think that Jared Goff would be a reasonable, if not a no-brainer, but a reasonable replacement for Kyler Murray in a situation where you really have no faith in Kyler Murray. Now, if you think Kyler Murray is going to be healthy, if his practice reports are glowing over the next couple days, then maybe you change your mind. But for now, I think that Jared Goff is somebody to keep in the back of your head as a possibility to start this week. So the Cardinals' defense is giving up a ton of passing attempts this year. Goff is 7th in the league in passing attempts, 8th in yardage. So this is a kind of game where Goff is going to get a lot of chances to rack up points. They're going to throw the ball a lot. I think that he'll finish as a top 10 quarterback this week.
Gotcha. I think I agree. We have another question just quickly.
Great.
And the question is specific, asking about, are we against rostering more than one quarterback, because we talked about this earlier, because the priority should be adding depth to running back and wide receiver positions? And if I can address this quickly, my opinion is that it's really about positional health and player scarcity, and that is that quarterbacks don't get injured as much as other positions that are
as any other position
in relation to the amount of points that they score on a weekly basis. And so
it's the same reason why you draft quarterbacks late.
You can, but I think the reason what I would say is this:
because the scarcity of the position is not like other positions.
But if you were to draft one of the top quarterbacks, so for example, in the case that you have Patrick Mahomes, having another quarterback on the roster that you get later is almost pointless, because that player is going to be so far removed from the value of your top quarterback that it doesn't make any sense to roster that person. You might as well have someone who's better at depth at a position that will be more traded out because of injuries or positional changes, like Jason mentioned. But if you have quarterbacks that you get lower, if you draft someone in the 7th round, 8th round, you pick up a guy like Jared Goff this year as your starting quarterback, then I can see why you would have two, because if you have two, their relation to each other's scoring is going to be similar.
And I think one of the reasons why you would only want to hold one quarterback is because you are likely to not have a very deep bench. In a lot of 10-team leagues, you're going to start 9 players. You're only going to have 5 or 6 bench spots. So you're going to need that space for bye week coverage and just whatever kind of injury depth you need for wide receiver and running back. And then oftentimes there are good quarterbacks available on the waiver wire whenever you need to go. So it's not just that the value is tight; it's that the value that is there on the roster, or I'm sorry, on the waiver wire, is just waiting there for you. Use that as your extra space.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we're still talking about this back from MathQuest's first questions. And he said he has a one quarterback, 10 team league. So in that case, there's 20 quarterbacks if everyone has two. And so there's still 12 quarterbacks that are starting on any given week, unless you're in the middle of the buys. But say there's 8. So you can choose from 8 other quarterbacks. One of those guys is going to have a good matchup. And what he said was he added Herbert back in week 4 after Herbert was starting to do well. So that's a good move.
That's not even like that is early for Herbert. You know, that's a good spot on Herbert. And perhaps if you do have a deep bench, you just grab him to keep him from the rest of your league.
But that's a speculative move, and so it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just that in a 10-team low bench league, all of the positional power should be put towards the running backs, wide receivers, and sometimes tight ends. But I do think that was a good move. And the other reason why I think it is because Kyler Murray, for example, is a quarterback that's a running quarterback, a quarterback that might be more likely to get injured, a guy who was like the Cam Newton of the past that was always running. Those kinds of quarterbacks, and RG3, who clearly got injured, and Michael Vick, who didn't last all that long. Those guys. And Kyler Murray is better than them at staying healthy, just like a Russell Wilson is, for example. Scrambles but slides. But he ended up injuring his shoulder, I think, on just sort of a regular play, not necessarily a rush. So that's our advice. And we have another question.
We have another question from the Centurion of the 13th Legion, Lucius Varinas.
Lucius Varinas.
Yes, this guy must be a fan of the
And by the
Rome
way, let me
TV
just say quickly that these questions are coming in if you're listening to the podcast on Stitcher or Apple or Google from our YouTube chat room, and you're more than welcome to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have these shows every week, and then you can interact with us directly here live on YouTube. So what is Lucius Varinas' question?
He needs our help making the playoffs, so he wants us to help pick his lineup. Lamar Jackson is the only quarterback he lists. So I don't know what your backup quarterback is. Lucius, let us know if you've got anybody. There are 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex he needs to fill. So Alvin Kamara, Taylor, help me out here. I'm drawing a blank.
You're drawing a blank.
Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor. Austin Eckler. Miles Sanders.
Okay.
Adam Thielen, DK Metcalf, and Cooper Kupp.
All right. So Austin Eckler, yes. DK Metcalf, yes. Do you have any other yeses on that list, Dave?
So I like Jonathan Taylor coming back in, and if your advice is to be held to not start Kamara, and we're going to do 2 RB2 wide receivers and a flex, then and Jared Goff having a good week, then I might start Taylor, Eckler, Metcalf, Kupp, and the question is, Adam Thielen's going to be healthy?
Thielen, I think yes.
So if he's not going to come back, which
he should be back because he was a close contact, not a positive test. They held him out as a precaution last week when he could have come back. I think that he'll be just fine this week. If he's playing, go with him because they're playing the Jaguars.
Well, I don't like Miles Sanders down the stretch at all, and he's been proving that right to me.
Yeah, he does have a decent matchup against the Packers because the Packers aren't that great against the run. However, like Alvin Kamara, if we can find someone with a better ceiling, let's go with them.
So I would start Taylor, Eckler, Thielen, Metcalf, and Kupp. And if Adam Thielen can't go, I think that I would end up starting, and you're not going to like this, Alvin Kamara.
That's fine.
Because he's Alvin Kamara.
I understand. And then he talks about how he's got Tom Brady on bye this week. And, Week 13 buys are bullshit. Teams shouldn't get the luxury of a December bye. That's ridiculous.
Well, it is what it is.
And Lamar Jackson plays the Ravens on Tuesday Night Football.
But we just talked about guys that you could pick up. Fitzpatrick, if he plays versus Cincinnati, great play. And I
kind of like Lamar Jackson against the Cowboys.
If he can play, yes. Yeah.
If he's going to play, yeah.
But
he's got 6 more days to clear.
Jared Goff this particular week against Arizona, like Jason mentioned. And I actually like Baker Mayfield to have like a comeback game. if he's out there.
Really?
I think that
You're saying something nice about Baker Mayfield. You realize that?
I think Stafford generally does well against Chicago. That's a tough matchup, but those have consistently been some big Stafford games. I think.
Sure. So I would recommend
Don't play Derek Carr.
picking up somebody at quarterback to keep in your back pocket, just in case the news all week about Lamar Jackson is bad. But as long as the news looks positive, it's the thing. He's starting on Tuesday. You may not have a choice but to just go with someone else because you don't have an answer about him.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it sounds like you had Lamar Jackson the whole way, and he hasn't been the quarterback that he was supposed to live up to being.
That game was supposed to be tomorrow,
which is probably why you are in a position where you have a must win. And I would almost always tell you to start Alvin Kamara, but as you may have heard if you were paying attention, if you were in the stream earlier, we're talking about not starting Kamara. And so I would consider him to be a flex play for you based on Jason's advice. I really like Taylor and Eckler. I really like Metcalf and Kupp this coming week. I think.
And if Thielen's going to play, I would go with Thielen over Kamara.
Yeah, I think Adam Thielen's going to be great. I would err towards the wide receivers that you have on your squad, and I would try to shy away from both Sanders and Kamara this particular week if you can.
Yep.
But thankfully, you have a bunch of good guys there. It's not like you're slim pickings.
That's true.
It's all right. You don't have to strap yourself to a rocket.
How many more references to movies and TV can we drop into this recommendation?
Well, we should do a whole show where we're just trying to do it not overtly and see how many we can get. We'll have a little piece of paper right next to us. And we can.
We can make it on the wall.
No.
I don't mean like on the wall. We'll put a whiteboard up or something.
No whiteboards.
Oh, you and your precious studio, Dave.
Oh,
so
God.
Let's get to the J Cut list, shall we?
Okay, let's do a lightning cut list.
Okay, so at quarterback, let's get rid of Cam Newton. He's still 79% owned, and he doesn't care about his stats. At the post-game press conference, he said, "I'm not going to apologize for winning." And good for you, Cam. You clearly don't care what other people think based on your wardrobe, so we're good here. Drew Brees, I don't remember if we talked about Drew Brees before, but he's not going to help you in the next 4 weeks, so get rid of him.
I still think that he will come back after Hill has maybe an unfortunate game this particular week. But
I don't think that Drew Brees' ribs and lungs are going to allow him to come back that quickly.
All right, but regardless of that, he's not a guy you should be keeping on your team in a redraft league.
At running back, Joe Mixon hasn't played since he hurt his foot in Week 6. He's still owned in 93% of leagues.
He's so hard to let go.
I know, but it's time. It's time. Leonard Fournette owned in 87% of leagues still. Hasn't put up double-digit points since Week 7 when he had a 12-point explosion. And finally, we got Devin Singletary owned in 81% of leagues. He hasn't put up double-digit points since Week 4. And that is the truth. Darius Slayton at wide receiver, only one double-digit game since Week 6. He put up a goose egg last week. Daniel Jones is iffy at best right now. Christian Kirk, 85% owned right now. Basically the same reasons as Hopkins that you don't want to start Kirk, at least for the near future. Manuel Sanders, he's owned in 72% of leagues still. Seriously, you guys? He has Taysom Hill as his quarterback. It's not going to happen. Speaking of what's not going to happen, Antonio Brown is not going to happen. Stop trying to make Antonio Brown happen. It's not going to happen. At tight end, Jared Cook. Anyone sensing a pattern here in New Orleans? We're telling you not to start anybody from New Orleans. Get rid of Jared Cook. And Tyler Higbee, I'm sure that you told us to cut Tyler Higbee before, Dave. I just needed to put that on there to tell myself to cut Tyler Higbee.
A couple of these guys have been repeat customers to the list, but that's okay. And I agree.
When they have such high ownership percentage, I feel like people aren't listening to us.
I agree with all of them. And look at
just trying to get the word out there.
Darius Slayton, for example, last week I had a gentleman that was predicted to not have a very good matchup, and I looked at him as who can I replace him with that could have a good game. So I was like Daniel Jones, Darius Slayton. Their matchup looked good. I went out and picked up Slayton. And I started Slayton, so Slayton gets the goose egg, and I'm sitting here with egg on my face. And I don't know if you guys know this,
goose egg on your face?
But goose eggs are larger than chicken eggs, and so that's a lot of egg to be on one person's face.
Jessica wants to know if we should cut David Johnson finally. I think so. I guess.
No, because David Johnson is
back, right?
coming back this week.
He's coming back. Yeah, he's coming back.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Duke Johnson.
That's right. I was gonna cut him.
Duke Johnson never really slid into that DM, that starting role that some people thought that he would, and he had an okay performance for 1 week, but in replacement of David Johnson in general, not so much. Now with Will Fuller gone as well, I feel like David Johnson has maybe even a larger role than he had previously. It doesn't mean he's going to blow up the world, but it does mean that Jason might consider starting him over Alvin Kamara.
Let's just stick with Frank Gore for now.
I'm saying I would rather start David Johnson from Houston than Frank Gore on the Jets, and I think they both have sort of like that 8 to 12 point kind of magic going on. But yes, I do think that David Johnson
it's not magic, Dave. It's an illusion. He
has a good chance of coming back this particular week, and because Duke Johnson didn't immediately take off on that starting role, which he had a chance to, it means that David Johnson will slip right back in.
Alrighty. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, everyone in the chat room, for participating, for giving us excellent questions this week. Thank you, Dave, for joining me.
Tell them about the website, Jason.
So please make sure you go to drinkfive.com, where you can see all of our weekly articles, Dave's rankings, my statistically insignificant fun little breakdown of stuff on Monday. You can check out the rookie report every week. You can check out the confidence picks every week. We're going to throw up some of the stuff that we discussed tonight on there. You can always find your way to the podcast from there. Please go to YouTube and subscribe to Drink 5 on YouTube so that we can have more subscribers and do more things on YouTube. And go to Twitter, follow us at Drink 5. Go to Instagram at Drink 5 as well, I assume. And, these are all great ways for you to communicate with us, for us to communicate with you.
Thanks. Cheers.
So cheers, everybody.